camera. I live in Arizona, so it's nice and hot. And with it being extremely hot here, can't really put the camera where it would normally be. So I gotta deal with a little bit of the steering wheel. But I wanted to talk to you all today about this learning to love yourself again and why this is so important. And so you'll have this so that you can kind of just listen to it, and whatever you're doing, you can listen. You don't really have to watch it. But in the email I sent out to everyone, I talked about how so much has changed. So much has changed in the last few years, and when you go back to 2020, life just happened. Excuse me, life changed in such a way that we would have never really imagined for most of us. We went into a place where we found ourselves locked down and not being able to gather amongst friends and family the way that we would normally do. And for some people, it impacted them, but it probably didn't impact them as much because, life as they currently know it, they don't really, or life as they know it even then, they don't really socialize that much. And so, with going into that pandemic and having to deal with those changes, you were either impacted because you found yourself realizing that as much as I did something, I probably don't do it as much. Meaning, I have friends, I have relationships, I have my family, I have my connection, I have my network, I have, all of these things. And I'm out and I'm amongst people, and I go places and I do things. And I have these deep connections with folks. And so when you think about that, and then going into isolation, how isolated were you? And were you so isolated to the point to where these deep connections that you had, maybe they weren't there as much? Because here's the thing, whether we are present together and enjoying each other's company, if something happens, we can also be present apart. And so it challenges how we think and how we feel about our relationships and the connections that we've made. Have we been very intentional with those relationships? And to what level have we been intentional with those relationships? How have we garnered them? How have we fostered those relationships and those connections so that, no matter what happens in our lives, those individuals are there, they're present in some form or fashion. Now don't get it twisted. Now, things happen in our lives. We grow up, we get older, we move further apart sometimes. But when you have a deep connection, that is a true connection, then that help or that relationship will still exist. For instance, can you pick up the phone now and contact those individuals? And if you do, what does that conversation, what do those relationships look like? And do you know, right? So it challenges us to really think about who we are and how we foster connections. Because again, even in a time of having to isolate, how isolated were you? Were you still deeply connected to those people, wherever they were in their life? Were you, calling them and texting them and checking in on one another? And if you were, how intentional were you? Were you doing the thing that social media said to do, which is, hey, check in, yet walking away without an understanding of what is actually going on with that person mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and even financially, which impacts all of the other areas in their life. So, I say all this because, sometimes we need to really have a moment of self-reflection, self-evaluation to see who we are. We say we are friends, brothers, sisters, but what does that mean? What does that mean in our lives? And what does that actually look like? Are you so familiar and become so accustomed to being familiar with people that you really don't know who they are, that you really don't know what's going on with them? And it's something to truly think about, because if we were to ever have to go back into a situation again where we are challenged to isolate, to be alone, where will you be? How will you be? How will you function? Do you have community? And will you only use that community for that time being? Many people moved into a place where they begin to connect online during the pandemic and during the lockdown, and that is absolutely fabulous. But when the pandemic was over, or when we started coming out of those spaces where you could go back out into, we'll say, the old things that you were doing before, what did you do? Did you leave those people behind? Do you still have those connections? And again, the question becomes, how deeply rooted are those connections? Did we scatter them away? So, with learning to love yourself again, I created this not out of the depths of my heart, meaning I needed to do this just for personal reasons. This is something that I realized through a lot of prayer, a lot of guidance, that it was something that was very, very necessary. Reviewing, analyzing, reflecting, even upon my own relationships, right? And who they are and how they've impacted my life. I have individuals that I've known longer than my son has been alive. And those individuals are a great part of my life in the way that they need to be. My son is moving to move on into the next phase of his life right now. And I was able to pick up the phone or even just send a text to a friend and say, hey, my son is going to be probably about 2 hours from you. And, just wanted to check in and see if, you could be there for him if anything happens. Now, I know you're thinking like, okay, well, I have people I can do the same thing. And that's great that you can. But the thing is that I know that, yes, while I can call this person and text this person, I know that if something actually did happen, she would go and get my kid, who's really an adult, but she would go and make sure that he's okay, as if she were taking care of her own. And she knows that if her child or any of her children were in close proximity to where I am, I would do the same. And that's how deep our connections are. But even with that, you know, we check in. We may not check in all the time, but we check in. We may not be able to hang out necessarily, just because of different lives. Our lives are different, and our lifestyles are a little different, to be honest with you. But I know that with something that is most precious to me, I can call and trust her with, and she knows she can do the same. And that's what we need. We need those people in our lives, but we need to kind of take a step back and think about who we are, what it is that we desire, what it is that we're living for and striving for, and then reflecting on who's in the circle around us to help us to get to where we need to be. Too often we find ourselves around people who have limiting beliefs about themselves, their faith, their walk, their life, or what have you. And their limiting beliefs are impacting how we move, how we feel, how we think, how we operate. You can reach out to them sometimes, and you might be able to gain some type of support, depending on what it is that you need. But it's going to cost you. It's going to cost you mentally, physically, spiritually, and emotionally at times, because of, you know, their mental capacity and their beliefs. And so we really need to think about that, and think about if we are continuously subjecting ourselves to being around individuals, people, places, or things that are killing us slowly, and not helping us to reach our full potential. This is part of the self-care that we don't talk about. We normally talk about self-care when we are referring to things like, oh, I need to go take a hot bath, or I'm going to go and eat my favorite foods, or I'm going to go spend time by myself, or I'm going to go and watch my favorite shows, or go and buy something that I like. You know, it's a lot of the self-indulgence. But the self-care that I want you all to really think about and start moving into is a self-care that anchors on loving who you are based off of who God says you are. You know, if he says that I have uniquely made you, if he says that I have plans for you, there's a promise for you, he says that you are a part of me and you carry my spirit, then do you have individuals around you that honor you in such a way? And do you honor them in that way as well? Because if you can't see yourself the way that God sees you, then, you know, it's going to definitely impact how others see you as well. And therefore, you're going to constantly find yourself in these superficial relationships that are not helping you, but they're constantly hindering you over and over and over and over again. And so if you ever find yourself in a situation like we were back in 2020, when you had to sit and be still, then you were challenged with knowing who God was in your life and how he operates and who he brings in your life and why he brings those individuals in your life, so that you can stay anchored to him. If not, you'll be back in a situation like we were 3-4 years ago, and you'll be in true isolation. True isolation. And that true isolation makes you self-absorbed, self-sufficient, truly relying upon self and thinking that you have a whole squad. And the truth is that all those people are there for you, but as much as they're there for you, they're not there for you. And they can't be there for you because you're not there for you. Well, I really hope that you guys come and take some time and join this workshop. This is one of many, not one of many, but one of 3 that we're going to be hosting this year. And we're not doing it. I'm actually not doing this after this year. This is your one and only chance to take the opportunity to move into a space of greater appreciation for who God says you are, and start moving into the plans and purpose that he has for you, and then being able to garner the tools and resources in order for you to be able to move with God in the next phase of your life. And so we've had so many things where, for years we've talked about Moses and Moses walking through the wilderness and Moses leading, the Israelites through the wilderness. And even when we hear messages in the church, it's like, okay, let's talk about Moses and let's talk about the wilderness. And, quite frankly, we need to move into revival. And revival is, how do we see God? Revival is, who is God in our lives? Revival is moving and living with Christ. Moving and living with God as he leads us, as we are anchored into him, and as we understand that we carry his spirit. What does that all mean? Well, this is where you come and you learn to love yourself. Learn to love yourself the way that God loves you, and then start moving into the plans and purpose that he has for you.